panel has been nicely queued up to talk about the future pressures and issues facing the NRA. And this panel is intended to consider some of the sticky and challenging resource management implications. We'll hear a little bit about ecological health. We'll hear about the relicensing of the dams. We'll hear about private property and public property and access. We'll also hear about tribal expertise. And we'll hear that from our panelists that have decades combined of expertise and experience in Hells Canyon and on various aspects of the management of the NRA and the running of this important protected area. So the panelists have their bios in the program, and you can read all about them in the program. I wanted to introduce them a little bit differently by highlighting their longstanding and deep connections to this particular place. So I will introduce the panelists right before they speak. And our first panelist is Nakia Williamson-Cloud, who's the Cultural Resources Director for the Nez Perce tribe. And his first experience in the canyon wasn't as much of an experience as part of an ancestral connection and the oldest sort of DNA experience of being in the canyon. And so he'll share with us not just about his own physical presence in the canyon, but in the importance of the place and its significance to the Nez Perce tribe. Thank you, Nakia, for joining us.
Just a short introduction in my language, the Nez Perce language. So again, thank you for this opportunity. Now, all what you said, I don't know how I'm going to get that in 15 minutes, but I'll do my best. So, you know, for us, you know, I think it's very appropriate for me, at least from my perspective, in terms of how we see ourselves in relationship to land and place is really significant. And again, I wasn't really part of the organization in terms of which panel, but I was going to be on. But I am going to definitely talk about some of the past. You know, for us, it's a continuum. It's a part of cyclic nature of our existence, of how we see ourselves in relationship to all of life. And our relationships are maybe somewhat different than your conception and your way of understanding of how we're seeing more broadly in terms of the relationships that we all have as modern people. We have relationships that we maintain within our families, with our loved ones, our spouses, our children. We obviously have those same kinships and relationships, but I think what sets apart the Nez Perce and Imipu experience from maybe a lot of others' perspective and relationships of how they see themselves in terms of kinship with other beings is that our relationships don't just extend to people, that they extend to what the broader society calls resources. We like to conceptualize them as life sources and the very land itself. So I think that's really fundamental and key to understanding of how we see ourselves in terms of what's happening today and the advocacy and all the good work that happens by many of you in this room. You know, it's really important to conceptualize and understand the perspective that Nez Perce people are approaching the resource management work that you heard about this morning in terms of our fisheries department, but many of the things that we're involved with it and the why that we're involved with. And so these relationships are promulgated through our culture, our language, and this map, which may be a little convoluted for you to see, gives a sense of that broader area, some 19 million acres that our people originally occupied, a much broader landscape stretching from the mouth of the Columbia River. In fact, the name Willamette, as we're told by our elders in the Willamette region around Portland, it means bundled together in the Nez Perce language. That's what our elders had told us during when a lot of the dams were being built, and we had to advocate for our own self and lives within the Columbia River system. all the way out to the east to a place we call Kusina, the Montana Plains, Wyoming Plains, out to places out there north of Gardner, what is now Gardner, Montana, Livingston, Montana, and even to this place here. This place was known to us as Kapkapala. Kapkap in our language is cottonwood. Ala is making fires. And so when our people came down here, the fuel that was utilized was primarily made out of cottonwood, because that was the predominant species of wood that we used to fuel our fire. So I say all this because it's really important, and as part of that conceptualization, you hear a lot of the discussion that's happened, and a lot of the ways in which we reference things on this landscape, this very important landscape of Hell's Canyon, and it usually corresponds to, for instance, where I live, the Lewis and Clark Valley, to Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, some explorers. That was just a small portion of time that came through in relationship to our broad experience, 10,000, 16,000, tens of thousands of years on the landscape, but yet all these things are named after prominent historic individuals. And I think it's really important to note that our place names are not talking about people. They're not talking about historical figures. They're not even talking about our chiefs and our historical individuals. They're talking about the land and resources and how we see ourselves. And what's important about those places is not the individual. It's what is there, the life sources, the resources, the land, the geography. That's what is important, because our lives as individuals are very insignificant to that broader understanding and that relationship that stretches for millennium for our people. And so, as we've heard, the actual administrative boundaries that have been drawn upon the landscape through the treaty making process, as we understand the 1855 treaty, which is represented here by the red, and the broader blue is, referencing that occupied where the Nez Perce village sites all existed up and down the Columbia River to the mouth of the Snake River, up into the Hell's Canyon area, and some of our camps that we had further out into the east and to the plains. And of course, the current 1863 reservation boundaries of the Nez Perce people. And so for us, this landscape that we're speaking of is very significant to the life and to the ways of our people. And our identity is definitely tied to this. We hear a lot of discussion, very beautiful discussion about people's experiences, about the values that they hold in relationship to this significant landscape. Well, for us, we have those same values. But again, as I kind of set the stage for what I'm speaking of directly, is that those values also are a part of that kinship and relationship that we try to maintain with this landscape, with all landscapes that are significant to our people through the treaty making process, as well as the advocacy that happened since then. The many court cases that have happened was a part of that advocacy. And it's really interesting to think about and to understand. We hear all of the, I think for us, any federal legislation, federal laws and regulations that help us achieve these things and advocate for this life and identity of our people, and that relationship that I'm speaking of is really important to us. But you'll notice in those discussions, there's never a mention of the Nez Perce people. There's never a mention of indigenous people. And so we have really fought hard as the tribe to try to advocate for ourselves, to find those people that we can have and collaborate with, and to do that, not only for the life of us, but all of life. And then I'll kind of explain that a little bit more. So, for me, these are very personal issues. These are very personal discussions. And as we talk about these landscapes, we're not just talking about land, we're talking about people. And one of the things and concepts that's really important to understand, we heard about preservation of landscape, preservation of resources. When myself and many of our tribal people, the Nez Perce people, when we hear that, it's personalized to us, because preservation of land and resources are impacts and decisions about land and resources, are decisions about me, my past, my existence here, and our future as it comes forward. And how that is that, again, getting back to that conceptualization, this photograph you see, this name, and when I introduced myself, that was the name I introduced myself as, because this was the name that's passed down several generations to me. My mother on my maternal side, who sits in the back of the room, this was her great-grandfather. And this name and this man, prior to the 1855 treaty, come from the village called Wakild, meaning a crossing place. We have two other places, one called, that now referenced as Doug Bar, was a very important crossing place from going from what is now Northeast Oregon over to Idaho, up into a very important campsite on the Camas Prairie near Tola Lake. But this place here, Wakild, is referenced in one of those places, as well as there's another crossing place just east of Riggins, what is now Riggins, Idaho, on the main stem of the Salmon River, we call Wataspa, which again is referenced in that crossing place there at Nakia Bar. So these are places in which we traverse the landscape. And again, this name and this village site was one of the places that my ancestors, this particular man and his father that went by the same name, had originated from. So again, we're talking about places, but we're talking about people, we're talking about kinship and how that carries forth through the generations. And specifically talking about the Hells Canyon, in our language, I think I heard one of the individuals prior to reference our name, Sakanma. That's the name for that the Nez Perce people have for the deepest part of Hells Canyon. And again, some of the perspectives about how deep that canyon is. In our language, sakas means a shade or a shadow. And so that place is referencing the shadowy place, the place that's perpetually in the shade. And again, on my mother's maternal side, it goes back several, probably 6-7 generations, that there was that lineage, that part of my lineage came directly from that specific place. And again, if we understand how we see ourselves in relationship, how we reference things, again, like I heard before, these words matter to us. How we reference something is not about a person. And for Nez Perce people, our view and relationship is even inculcated in the very individual ancestral names that we use as our identity today. A name of that place is not only a name of a place, but when our people would move, when a woman would marry outside of her immediate band, she would take with her that name, or if she had a female child, that name would be bestowed on her. So this is what happened in my family. Sakanma was also a place name, but it was an individual on my mother's maternal side, and it meant woman from Hell's Canyon. So instead of naming a place after a person, the place is named us. And so it's a whole different way of seeing ourselves in relationship, and that gets recycled. And this name is the name that is carried by my mother. That's she's 84 years old, and be 85 here in the next month. Carries that name of Sakanma, woman from Hell's Canyon. So this is a part of that enduring legacy and an identity that our people have that connects us on a very individual level to these places. That is really important to how we see ourselves in terms of the advocacy, all of the great environmental work, but even the expression environmentalism doesn't fully express what we do and why we do what we do, because the concept of environmentalism, even we heard discussion of the National Park Service, that I think part of the fallacy of that is it doesn't conceptualize, or it conceptualizes people as being separate from the landscape. And that's not how we see ourselves in relationship. We see ourselves in relationship with the landscape, in relationship with resources, and you can't separate the two. The idea of separating our social life, our identity from resource concerns is totally foreign to us. Our life and our social well-being, our health, well-being and resource concerns are one and the same. And for us, that's a very basic understanding and concept that we have that we think doesn't just apply to us; it applies to everybody. And so within that advocacy, long history of advocacy, the 1855 treaty that was mentioned, many of those things, that we now have to speak in the language that folks in positions of power, resource managers, the U.S. federal government, that we have to speak of these in terms of rights that were put to paper within the 1855 treaty, Article 3 of the 1855 treaty, where 58 Nez Perce chiefs signed that sacred document to preserve that life, but also preserve the peace at that particular time. And that life was a way in which our people advocated, and we have to speak in this language that's foreign to us about the thing called rights. But really, that document, even though we have to uphold it within the court of law, as these are our rights as written in this formal contract that's also memorialized in the U.S. Constitution. A lot of people don't understand that under the supremacy clause. That so if you're a big supporter of the U.S. Constitution, you're by virtue big supporters of our treaty because it's in the U.S. Constitution and referenced explicitly in the treaty. But that was not a way just to advocate for our rights, but more importantly, through our culture, our identity, and way of life, it was talking about our responsibilities. And I think that's what we're really here to talk about, and that the responsibilities that we all share as people that use these places, these very important sacred places. These are still places that are important to us, that are part of the enduring identity and the advocacy that happens. And oftentimes it is true that we are at odds with different, organizations or different other resource users that are sometimes put at danger, the things that we hold dear. But we also can find ways and common ground to move forward. And if any of you that have been able to work with the Nez Perce tribe knows that we try to make good partners with people that are advocating and doing their work in regards, even though we may be at odds at the broader, sort of standpoint that your organization may be. We can find that common ground and we can find that connection. See some of my good friends over at the table, Vaughn and Allison with the Idaho Power. Idaho Power, we've been at contention with those for a lot of different issues in terms of the relicensing, the impact to resources that are important to our identity as Nez Perce people. But I consider Vaughn, Allison, and people at Idaho Power my friends and collaborators. And so there is that ability for us to step outside of that, and that this relationship that we're trying to protect is based on that kinship and relationship we have with the land, with the resources, but also that relationship we can extend to you in this room, to people that are administrating and making decisions on this landscape. The U.S. Forest Service have been collaborating with us for many years. And so that relationship that we're trying to preserve is connected to you all and everyone within this room, outside of the room, that is involved in this work. Of course, there are many challenges, for us, and I think we all know what many of those challenges are. These are the same challenges we have, been facing for generations and generations as Nez Perce people. And through, I think, that really ability for us to engage and to be those willing partners and to collaborate and to find ways, within the various land management agencies that have the management authority over these places. I would just again remind you that the management of these resources is the management of us, and the life that we're talking about, the life of species that are important to us, the Natok, the Chinook salmon, the many species of anadromous fish, other four-legged species that are part of all of our lives. I think there really needs to be an understanding of what we're advocating for. That when the salmon issue is not an issue, it's not a resource issue. For us, it's an issue of our identity, our culture that persists and has persisted on this landscape for millennium. And what we are advocating for is the basic fundamental elements that provides for all life, the life of the salmon, the life of Nesper's people, but also your life too. So the advocacy goes beyond and recognizes and engages all of humanity, all of life on this land. And so that future is very important. It's an integral for us to be able to find that common ground and work together as a community, as a region, and as a nation as we move forward. So I guess I'll leave it at that. And again, thank you for this opportunity to engage in this discussion, and also thank the organizers for putting us after lunch, because that's usually when people are kind of nodding off. Again, thank you very much. Kansi out to everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nakia, for sharing your wisdom and insight with us. Our next panelist is Tom Montoya, who's retired as the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest Supervisor. He retired in 2021 after a 36-year career with the Forest Service. And Tom first traveled to Hell's Canyon from Western Oregon 30 years ago as part of a family camping trip. His family and 3 friends took a weekend trip down to Copperfield Park, a BLM site near Oxbow. And on that weekend, they camped and enjoyed the site. Tom's son was 5 years old and still remembers playing in the water. And Tom fell instantly in love with the canyon and knew he wanted to return. And he did 20 years later as the forest supervisor. Tom, thanks for being on our panel and sharing your insights with us too.
It's a real privilege to be here today. As a retiree from the Forest Service, I'll preface my discussion as I'm able to speak freely because I'm not tied by somebody in DC. So what you're going to hear today is that untethered discussion that I think you all want to hear, right? So I'm going to start my slides. It's really titled "A View into the Future While Looking into the Past," and I really could have started this slide starting with 1905, which is when the Forest Service was created and reserves were designated at that time. And really that first, I would say, 50, 60 years of the Forest Service was really commodity driven. Grazing, mining, it really drove what the Forest Service did. And it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that recreation and things like national recreation areas even were thought about. So I'm going to start my first slide talking a little bit about the relicensing process, because really that's driven a lot of what recently we've done over the last, I would say, 30 years or so years. So in 1955, the first license was issued. That was the first license from FERC, and FERC drives that whole process. The Forest Service comes to the table and makes recommendations that we like to see happen on the land. As you all know by now, 1975, Hell's Canyon NRA was designated with 2 wild and scenic river stretches. So the upper part is really the wild section, the lower is the scenic portion, and that really started us more active in terms of management of that landscape. And there was multiple forests involved at that time. And interesting piece, that all, because of the legislation, was handed over to the Wallowa-Whitman to manage the NRA. But we did that in cooperation with the other forests in terms of just making sure we were doing what they wanted to, and had to develop a plan based on input from the public. So in 2000, the project, Hell's Canyon Dam project, began the relicensing process, and a new license at that time was issued. In 2005, that license expired, and we started a process of annual licenses for the dam. And the Forest Service was involved with those. And that continued for what seemed like forever for the agencies. In 2020, what precipitated in 2020 was the certifications for water quality that were finally negotiated between the states And once those were figured out, the licensing process was picked up by Idaho Power to work with FERC. So in 2007 was that first FERC license. It was issued. It lasted for a while. And then in, like I said, in 2019, the states finally worked on that 401 certification for water quality. Forest Service picked this ball back up, interesting enough, right after I retired. So I retired in May of 2021, and a month later, I was contacted by the Forest Service, the regional office in Portland. Said, Tom, would you mind coming back as a contractor to just mentor some leadership here that is new to this process? And I said, I'm more than willing to do that. So I've been involved with kind of the mentoring of the agency, the Forest Service folks that are now working through that relicensing process and have been up until recently. In July of 22, the Forest Service started really getting into negotiation with Idaho Power, and again got some things I think worked out over the last several years, and some really great work by Brett Dumas and his staff coming to the table with the Forest Service and just hearing us and hearing our concerns of what we wanted to see for the future for Hell's Canyon in terms of that license. And so in October of last year, the Forest Service leadership in Portland, the regional forester actually is the one that signed a settlement agreement with Idaho Power. It's an off-license agreement that goes up to FERC. They use that when they go through the next process of the relicensing process. So there's some steps that still need to be completed. FERC still has to issue a draft supplemental EIS. We've been waiting, the agencies have been waiting for that for about a year now. As you know, there's something happening in Washington, D.C. now that I think is stalling things. So I'll just leave it at that. We still have to go through consultation with our tribal governments, and that's really important to the Forest Service. I can tell you, in talking to the Forest Service leadership, that is near and dear to their heart to make sure they meet those trust treaty responsibilities that they have with the tribes affected. So that still has to be completed, and they will continue to do that as required. They'll file with FERC their 4E conditions, which is part of the FERC process, as well as those settlement agreements. And a really important part I want to emphasize is the Wild and Scenic River determination. So when you have a wild and scenic river, you have to reevaluate those areas and make a determination of what the effect of that project is. And so that has been done, and it'll move forward through that process in terms of the FERC relicensing. Implementation of whatever comes out of the final decision in those agreements will continue for the next 50 years. And with that comes monitoring. So part of this is adaptive management. So the agencies will have to monitor along with Idaho Power and monitor the river, monitor actions, making sure they're working. If they're not working, we go back to the table, we talk about those things and see how we can adjust. I'm going to shift a little bit to, I think, a topic that folks have been asking me about when I was asked to be put on this panel, and that's budgets and staffing levels. And that's in light of the work that's going on right now with DOGE and with what folks are seeing happening to the agencies. So I'm going to delve into that a little bit. I'm going to start with what's happened since 1992. So in 1992, I was working in Central Oregon on a ranger district, and Bill Clinton was in office, and he worked bipartisan with Congress to reduce the government, essentially. And so there was a lot of things swirling in the Northwest related to spotted owls and those things. But overall, those numbers are really shocking to me. This is a graph that the National Forest Service retirees put together several years ago. And it really tells a story of the decline in the agencies over of the Forest Service over the last 30 to 40 years. Major decline in the folks that you need on the ground to help manage the land. So it's about a 30%, average 30% reduction going into this year. But that's a big hit. But when you think about another 10 to 20% reduction in the agency that's managing your public lands. Right now, from a budget standpoint, the Forest Service last year got about $8 billion to manage the national forests across the nation, including Alaska and Puerto Rico and Hawaii. That was down 3% from previous years. Interesting enough, fire, which plays a big part of the landscape, went up 4%. So it's really driven where the agency's gone in terms of our management and how we look at the landscape. If you haven't looked at the budget numbers that are coming out from this Congress, it's another additional 10%, another $1 billion reduction in the Forest Service alone is proposed. The only one that isn't being hit so hard is fire again. It's going up, and it also has not been hit by the effects from Doge. So if you haven't seen some of those things, probationary employees have been released. I think that's my next slide here. Probationary employees are really those employees that are new to their position. And sometimes we think, well, they just started with the Forest Service. Absolutely not. If you take a promotion into a new position, you're subject to probation. And I have personal friends who have worked for the agency for 10 to 15 years and were probationary. Some of those folks, by the way, have left the agency. They said, no more. We're tired of this work by Doge and disrespecting our skills that we provide to the agency. And it's really sad for me as a previous forest supervisor and a Forest Service employee to see that happen. Over the last several years, and I'll say 3 years, the agency really shifted from having a temporary workforce to more of a permanent workforce. So a lot of employees were converted from temporaries to permanent positions. We went from about 7,000 temporaries to about 3,000 temporaries nationally, and that was to deal with fuels reductions, again, related to fire, to try to deal with some of that. Again, once you make those folks converted over to permanent, they're probationary, so they are subject to all those layoffs that you're now seeing. Through Doge, there's about nationwide, the number I've been given is about 3,400 probationary employees. If you think of that 10% to Region 6, which is Oregon and Washington, that's 340 employees that are now probationary and subject to that layoff. Again, those past reductions come into play in how that's going to affect the future in terms of being able to drive local decisions and local work. So I want to talk now. So I get this to change. Some implications of how this may affect Hell's Canyon. Really, once we saw the impacts of COVID on public lands, which really drove up folks seeking out their public lands, and that has not declined since COVID. It's continued to grow. So visitor use in the NRA has continued to grow. We're seeing more people recreating there, hiking, boating, all those things that they love from their public lands there in Hell's Canyon. So that's an impact that you're going to continue to see, I think, into the future in terms of these reductions impacting how we're able to manage that visitor use. When you don't have seasonals, out there managing campgrounds and doing those great things that you're used to. And that's really what the agency has heard over the years is we want to see the Forest Service out there. We want visitor contact. But I think you might see less visitor contact, to be honest with you. There may be some impacts to Wildly Scenic River value. I'll talk a little bit about noxious weeds on a later slide, but I see that as a really big impact to Wildly Scenic Rivers, as well as the loss of sandbars out there over the course of the last 40 years. And luckily, we've been able to work some things out with Idaho Power, and hopefully those things can come back to the landscape in terms of sandbars being replenished. But again, there's still some impacts there. Impacts to cultural resources, again, going back to our trust treaty responsibilities with the tribes, we got to make sure we're protecting those areas that are sensitive. We all love the land, but we also have some impact on the land, and hopefully folks respect those cultural resources that are out there. The spread of invasive weeds, again, has a great impact on recreation, and if you're not aware of what that impact is, I'm going to give you some numbers I got from the local unit. So there's a little over 25,000 acres of infestation out there. Majority of that is rust skeleton weed. And I don't know how familiar you are with this. It's a really aggressive weed. It gets in there any way it can, airborne through birds and other animals, as well as people. And once it's established, it takes off like wildfire, and actually causes our fires to be hotter and quicker and burn where they probably wouldn't burn before because the native species would be there. But all of these plants are in there. These are the major ones that the local unit's trying to treat. The bottom should be shocking to you. Only treating 1,000 acres. Really what they're trying to do is confine and contain. So if they go out and monitor and they see a new infestation, they're jumping on that. But if there's a huge patch out there, it's really hard to control at that point. Opportunities. I wanted to end on a positive note here. There really are some great opportunities as we look forward. The last panel talked a lot about collaboration, and great to have Shay sitting next to me. Something that came out of the work that I was doing at the time as forest supervisor with recreation fees really gave birth, I think, to Shay and his group coming forward and saying, we want to help you. And I'm glad they did, because that really has saved the agency's butt in a lot of ways in helping to treat areas, maintain facilities that just were run down and needed some help, as well as just being on the river and helping out wherever we needed it, and coordinating with the agency as needed. Health Canyon Visitor Center, Idaho Power has been a great partner there. That visitor center could not operate without Idaho Power. Some years the Forest Service has not been able to staff that. Idaho Power stepped up to help that, and I see that continuing into the future. Is that partnership is going to be really important. Interpretation and education. I see a really growth there, and I want to see it expand, especially with the tribes. I hope the agency takes that and runs with it. I was a district ranger on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River for years, and we had a great interpretation program with the Shoshone-Bannock tribe, and they were on the river and they interpreted. And I see those same kind of opportunities again that could happen in the future for Hell's Canyon. Monitoring, again, Idaho Power's been great help there and continue to help, as well as other partners that have stepped up to help with monitoring. Those are wildlife agencies, state agencies, that just know the importance of that monitoring. Cultural and historic resources, again, working with folks, especially the tribes, to manage those really important cultural resources, as well as our treaty rights. Fisheries has been a really emphasis, especially in the past at Pittsburgh Landing, for example, and I appreciate the discussion about that. And we want to see that continue into the future. Those are great opportunities. And I mentioned invasive weeds. However we can get help, however we can get folks certified, I think the Forest Service will take that help to help treat those 25,000 acres of noxious weeds out there that need to be treated. Lastly, I want to mention fire, both prescribed fire and natural fire. So it was probably 15, 20 years ago, the Forest Service started what's called the Tri-Forest Agreement, and that's with the Payette, the Nez Perce Clearwater, and the Wallowa Whitman to manage Hell's Canyon in a way that's comprehensive to all our interests. And so we share resources, smoke jumpers, hell attack crews, all those things come together to help to manage fires when they happen in the canyon, because neither one of those forests can deal with those that are dealing with other things related to fire. So that's been really helpful to have that agreement. We're hoping to have Idaho Power as part of that, as well as our state partners in Oregon and Idaho help to be part of that agreement as well. And then prescribed fire, we need to get more fire on the landscape. That'll help treat that land and keep those fires from getting bigger. And with that, I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our next panelist is Shay White, who serves as co-chair of the Hell's Canyon Recreation Collaborative. Shay's first trip to the canyon came when he was 3 years old. He has no memories of that trip, but he does remember nearly all of the subsequent trips. He loved watching his dad run the boats up the river, and his mom worked the Dutch oven so that they ate better on the river than they did at home. Every season on the river was distinct, and Shay now dreams of paying these memories forward with his friends and hopes that his son, Walker, who's having the best kind of nap in mom's arms over here and will be 12 weeks old tomorrow, will have similar experiences and memories. Thanks, Shay.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a slide show. Let me start out with saying, with a quote, there's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. And that was said by Jimmy Doolittle. What Hell's Canyon means to my family. Yeah, that show, we wanted to show that first trip in Hell's Canyon for me. But volunteer wise, this is where it started for my family and myself. This was a trip in 1990 to put the picnic tables throughout the entire canyon at the different campsites. A lot of those are no longer. They're either at Kirkwood, or only one that I know of is down in Pittsburgh Landing that's still there. But they went in from the Pittsburgh Landing with the Forest Service and went all the way to Granite to install these picnic tables. These are just really neat pictures we had laying around, and my dad is the one wearing the University of Idaho shirt. So this is just kind of what Hell's Canyon means to me and what I want to see in the future of Hell's Canyon. One of the reasons why I do what I do is for the future. Just growing up at Hell's Canyon and looking at the natural beauty of the canyon and the fishing, being able to go in there and eat the best food possible, and run challenging whitewater. Jumping off Sturgeon Rock. I mean, if you've been to Hell's Canyon, you haven't jumped off Sturgeon Rock. I don't really know if you've been to Hell's Canyon. This is one of my favorite signs, was one of my favorite signs in the canyon. Growing up, I actually went to Chief Joseph Elementary in Meridian, and we were able to donate a picture of this sign to the elementary school, and it still hangs today. Sorry. Learning how to run the river safely with my dad was one of the greatest things I could ever imagine doing, and it it taught me a lot about respecting the river and being very careful on the river, making sure, everybody enjoys their time. One of the things that Collaborative did is a river etiquette video. I know a lot of people aren't very happy sometimes when a boat goes up the river and they get waked. That's stuff that we want to try and mitigate, not have as much happen. Very, very cautious about it, but the etiquette video was sponsored by Parks and Rec through a grant, and that's really gone a long ways, especially on Rec.com. Fishing in the canyon and getting to be that close to bighorn sheep is kind of cool. They just walked in on us at camp while we were cooking food. Just having good times with family and friends. That's what the canyon is. Second and third generation. So in this picture, there's two of us older people that are the second generation, and then that's a third generation right there that we're now taking in after a hiatus of not going in together as friends. It's getting to teach them the beauty of the river and showing it to them. We were talking about that earlier. The experiences of our first sturgeon for kids. That's what Hell's Canyon means to me. All right, that brings us to HCRC. So Hell's Canyon Recreation Collaborative was brought forth due to the dislike of a fee proposal in Hell's Canyon for $5 to $10 per person per day, kind of like salmon is. We had meetings. Forest Service came down to Boise. We had a meeting here, had a meeting in Riggins, and then the big meeting that happened in Lewiston. That was not. It was not comfortable being in that. It seemed like there was people that wanted to have fistfights. People who recreate are extremely passionate about what they do, and for the Forest Service to come forth with this fee proposal, and don't get me wrong, it was very, very vague on what they were going to do with it. Jake did not do a good job with it. But with that being said, came back, kind of thought about it, sat down with Sandra Mitchell, and kind of tried to devise a plan. What can we do to help the Forest Service and help with their deferred maintenance? And what can we do? So Sandra got on the horn with some of the congressional delegations and came up with a collaborative. The big thing with the collaborative is our first meeting we had. My first words to everyone was, your mode of transportation is left at the door, and if you're not okay with that, there's the door. That has been our motto the entire time. It's for the betterment of everyone and the betterment of the canyon. And it ended up helping the Forest Service extremely. Right here, what you're looking at on that picture was the bathrooms at Pittsburgh Landing. They needed to be redone. They were in very disrepair. So luckily, Idaho Parks and Rec has a very, very good grant program. And as a collaborative, we pretty much wrote it, didn't we? Yeah, Kelly wrote that one. And Forest Service signed off on it and said, let's do it. So we got a group of volunteers together and went in and tore those bathrooms apart and put them up within. That bathroom got done in 2 days. The next one was 1 day, and then they had to come back in another week to finish the third one. But there, you could see that they were large, very large. One of the neat parts about the collaborative is we have 3 agreements with the Forest Service. And when people want to go in and volunteer, you got to have an agreement with the Forest Service to be able to do so. That takes liability off. Well, what different groups are doing now is they're coming in, they come to us, and they work under our umbrella. So anybody can go in there and volunteer. We have Boy Scout groups, hikers from different parts of the country come in and clearing trail. Their youth challenge, wasn't it? Idaho Youth Challenge comes in. They've done trail work for us. So HCRC, when we were established, we wanted to get everybody involved. Anybody that wanted to be a part of it could be a part of it. We asked many groups to be a part of it. Some turned us down, which was perfectly fine. But HCRC is composed of rafters, jet boaters, aviators, motorized recreationalists, commercial outfitters, backcountry horsemen, citizens at large, local government, veterans associations, pretty much you name it, we'll have you. We just want to get a collective group together that there's no conflict. And that is what it's been. There is absolutely zero conflict, and we've had zero conflict. With that understanding that it's for the betterment of Hell's Canyon. One of our missions is to make it easier. So one way we make it easier is when we do trail crews. Instead of the trail crew hiking all the way up the river, trying to get as much trail cleared as possible, we're using different modes. So we're using jet boats to take the hikers upriver 30 miles to clear the trail. They walk down, camp, then they're jet boated back out. So 2 user groups that probably usually wouldn't be talking are using each other to get things done in that canyon. I know the entire Idaho side, the trails has been cleared, and the Oregon side has been cleared through blackberry bushes. That's been really nice to get those trails clean. You've seen some of those pictures that Marty sent. I need to show you one of those. It's neat. HCRC supports and promotes multi-use recreation in Hell's Canyon by partnering with the U.S. Forest Service, state and local governments, maintain access and availability for recreation sites by identifying sites in need of maintenance, completing site condition assessments, providing recommendations and coordinating solutions based on the recommendations and site needs. So we'll actually go out with Forest Service or different individuals, do a site assessment, come back, okay, what can we do? We'll go to the Forest Service and say, what can we do? And obviously their hands are tied sometimes. And we can only work within that scope. But we have been able to figure out how to do so, we've been able to figure out how to kind of circumnavigate the law. I think that's the best way to say it. I was up at Hell's Canyon the other day teaching the sheriffs how to run whitewater. And we went up to Cache Creek, and they came down, the caretakers came down and said, yeah, we need a battery for the lawnmower. Okay, well, we'll see if the Forest Service can get it. Well, they can't get it right now. Okay, get on Starlink and get a hold of our facilitator and say, hey, go to the hardware store and buy a battery. One of the sheriffs is coming down to pick it up. It's that simple. Forest Service really didn't need to know what some of the things that happened. And that's just small. But we're able to use, some of the caretakers as, hey, what's going on here at the site? What do you want? What do we need done? It's little stuff like that really pays off in the long run.
Thank you so much for sharing about the collaborative. Fantastic. Our last panelist is Chris Welcker, who's the principal engineer and the geomorphologist for Idaho Power. Chris's first day on the job in March of 2007 began in Boise at Idaho Power headquarters, signing some HR forms like most first days do. But then he got in the truck and drove to the canyon. And that was his first experience at the canyon. He met his new team and they went to the site immediately. And he's worked there for almost 2 decades on the canyon since. So thanks for joining us and sharing your expertise, Chris.
A couple of years ago, we were hiring somebody into the group, and they asked what favorite part of my job was. And everybody else talked first. They got around to me, and I said that I get to go back to the same place again and again, different seasons, different changes, high water, low water. I get to see how all the different parts and pieces work together and really understand a place. And that's would be awesome for me just anywhere, but it's even more awesome when it's Hell's Canyon, because that's one of my favorite places in the world. I want to say thank you to the Andrus Center and to the McClure Center for directing everybody's attention to this place that's that interesting. What were you aiming at?
I'm still pointing over there. I don't know. I think they were just watching me like.
Okay. As Emily said, my first day working at Idaho Power was I went to Hell's Canyon. 2 weeks ago, I went there again. We were looking at the Forest Service's sandbar replenishment sites. In the 18 years between those trips, I've been out there 50 times probably. Various types of surveying, scuba diving, equipment maintenance, sample collection, training, playing tour guide. But it's not just me. I'm just the tip of the Idaho Power iceberg down in Hell's Canyon. If you are going down to Hell's Canyon, the first space you will see launching at Hell's Canyon boat ramp is an Idaho Power employee. Jared, raise your hand. He works full time, impressing our raft guide. Taking care of the raft trips, answering questions, and maintaining the facilities that everyone uses. He's all the way down at the bottom at the visitor center, and 100 miles downstream to the north is our Clarkston, Washington facility, is where our new jet boat driver Clayton Waller is based out of. And in the 100 miles of river between there, most of which is the HCRA, you're going to run into a lot of other Idaho Power employees because we're there a lot. Idaho Power spends about 9,000 person hours every year down in Hell's Canyon. When we receive our new license, that'll go up to 12,000 hours. We're there all the time doing all kinds of work. And I think it's sometimes confusing when I talk to people here in Boise, so far away from the river, why that is. That somebody who just get their power bill every month. They wonder, why are we down in Hell's Canyon at all? And it's like, well, you're just the power company. Well, we're the power company that also owns hydroelectric dams. And one of the basic functions, or one of the basic compromises, is that if you're going to have a hydroelectric dam on an American river, then you're going to have to understand what your impacts are and mitigate for those impacts. And that's why we're out there all the time. The work of Idaho Power scientists on all these different topics have been shared publicly through hundreds of scientific articles about fish, plants, recreation patterns, archaeological sites, and sediment. The last one, studying the sandy gravel, is what gives me a job. It's not bad for a power company. But do you want to follow up on Nakia's comment? Some advice for presentations: don't go after lunch. Don't be on the last panel of the day. Don't be the last speaker on the last panel. Don't have a topic like future pressures and issues, which just sounds menacing. So to lighten it up, I wore this shirt, so you're welcome. I don't know if anybody saw my title up there. So I want to keep with the doom and gloom theme, a little tongue in cheek. And my topics are: I want to talk about overcrowding, ignorance, and broken supply chains in healthcare. Starting with overcrowding, if I can get this to work. This up and to the right graph shows a big increase through the years. And since we're talking overcrowding, you might think this is an annual increase in visitors, permit applications for rafting, or maybe number of porta potties that have to be cleaned. But actually, this increases the number of reds or fall Chinook salmon nests. And this is a good kind of crowding. Here on the far left of the graph, in the 90s, they were down to less than 100 reds in the Snake and Salmon rivers combined. And now on the far right, well, It's a lot. These are fall Chinook salmon. And these are their reds or nests where they clean out the gravel in the bottom of the river. Starting in 1992, we used to survey those using helicopters. Then we switched to using drones. And then we've also developed methods where we can use an underwater video system and look at reds deeper than people even thought that they spawned, down to 25 feet below. That's the how. But there's also the question of the why of this trend. Obviously, this is great news that they're going up. This is actually similar to some of the stuff Joe showed in our keynote address. But back in the 90s, people rightfully freaked out about how few salmon were returning and making nests. In the Nez Perce tribe, they undertook a large hatchery supplementation program. Idaho Power changed the way that we operate Hell's Canyon Dam to provide stable spawning flows and protective emergence flows. There were changes to improve fish survival downstream and changes to the harvest regulations. Between these four things, fall Chinook numbers are really gone up. They've gone up so much that the tribe has actually stopped putting as many fish into Hell's Canyon. They're putting them into the salmon, which is where that red line at the bottom. We're seeing increased numbers in a whole different river system, which is all. There's so many fish that there's now a fishery that somebody was mentioning earlier down in Lewiston. That's one of the most popular salmon fisheries in Idaho. And at the rate that they're going, the fall Chinook might overcrowd themselves right off the endangered species list, which is great news. My second pressure is ignorance. There's just so much we don't know about lamprey. I'm sure everybody in this room has heard the phrase charismatic megafauna. This is not it. This is a face only a mother could love. But it's a fascinating and an important fish. You may know the salmon life cycle going out to the ocean and coming back up, the impact of dams and fish ladders and all that sort of, all that's true of lamprey as well. But we just haven't studied them as much. We just don't know as much about them. I don't know if it's because they're so icky looking. That might be the reason, but they are. We just don't have the information. I'd love to show you a graph. It's the up and to the right graph. The up and to the right graph for the fall Chinook salmon. And maybe that's the trend, maybe that's not the trend, but we just don't know at this point. We need to do more studies. Like the fall Chinook salmon, they lay their eggs in the bed of the river. And where fall Chinook try to leave, they'll leave Hell's Canyon within a few months of emerging from the gravel. The larval lamprey stay in the river for years as filter feeders in the slack water areas. Then they transform into an adult, they start chewing on other fish, and they're heading out to the ocean. Because of the cultural significance of lamprey, the Nez Perce tribe has been translocating fish for over 15 years. They've actually developed a stable population of returning fish in Asotin Creek down in Washington. We're excited to collaborate with them and Fish and Wildlife Service to understand the Hell's Canyon portion of their life cycle. We're just beginning to figuring out how to study lamprey. We're actually developing new techniques to do electrofishing in deep water, which isn't something we've had to do before. So I'm hopeful in future years, somebody else can come give this presentation and we'll actually have that graph. And even if it's not as positive of the story, we'll at least know what the story is and we can do something about it. So we will be overcoming our ignorance. And the last depressing thing I want to talk about is broken supply chains. As opposed to the upstream migration of salmon and lamprey to get to Hell's Canyon, sand only travels downstream. The life cycle of the Hell's Canyon sandbar starts in the mountains and hills of the Idaho Bathtooth, which is what you're seeing here in red. And this is where light-colored granites decompose into light-colored sands. Historically, the sand migrated downstream through the Boise and Payette rivers to the Snake River, and then north to Hell's Canyon. But starting in 1909, a series of federal government dams were built on the Boise and Payette. And not just little dams. When Arrow Rock was built on the Boise in 1915, it was the largest concrete arch dam in the world. Over 50 years after Arrow Rock, Idaho Power built our dams and completely closed off all the sources from the Idaho Bathtooth to deliver sand into Hell's Canyon. The results have not been surprising. The sand is continuing its natural downstream migration, but with no upstream supply to replenish the sandbars to wash away. While the Hell's Canyon complex of dams are only a part of the problem, we are funding 100% of the solution. Idaho Power is committed to providing $19 million to the Forest Service, as Tom was talking about earlier. So the HCNRA staff can reroute the supply chain and replenish acres of sand down in Hell's Canyon for recreation and aesthetic purposes. All the Forest Service properties range in many uses, and that's also true of HCNRA. So the Forest Service will have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to balance the locations of where that sand is going to end up. And those will be tough decisions for them to be making in the future. But we are excited to partner with them and help them with some of our data and some of our science, and then we'll be doing the monitoring on those sandbars in the future. Idaho Power is anticipating a new license to operate Hell's Canyon that Tom was talking about. I actually was hired in 2007 for that license, so I'm sure it's right around the corner, right, Brett?
Never been closer.
We've never been close. But when we do get the new license, that will unlock $1 billion of compliance and mitigation spending from Idaho Power that goes into the canyon, improves what we know about the canyon, and improves the conditions in the canyon. My career may only overlap the first few years of that 50-year license. So while it won't be me, I know there will be plenty of Idaho Power employees who will get the privilege of working at Hell's Canyon like I did. Thank you.
So we'll roll right over in here. But my first question for this panel is to ask what having the right people at the right levels of federal service means for each of your interests here. Can you say a little bit about how these concerns about job security might impact gateway communities or tribal interests, or the sort of overall impact on the work that's being done in the canyon now? We can start with you, Nakia.
I was trying to pass the phone. Yeah, very, very complex issue. And obviously, we've heard a lot about, some of the things that are happening that are troublesome in terms of, for us, I think it's mentioned in my bio, we work with 13 national forests. We work with, I think 3, actually 4, if you count Tulsa, because we do have interest with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers down in Oklahoma, because our people were relocated down there from 1878 to 1885. Numerous other agencies, Bureau of Land Management, and we're seeing those people that we've established relationships, have these challenges in terms of they're already depleted staff and ability to engage us. And unfortunately, we hear a lot of talk about recreation, and I'm not trying to minimize the importance of that, but there's also other issues that need an equal amount of dedication and attention and the associated funding. So that's going to be a challenge, and it is definitely a challenge we're seeing now in terms of some of the things that we see happening on a federal level, and how they used to trickle down. Now it's like they're not trickling down. It's just like, it's immediate impacts we're seeing with a lot of our federal partners. So the thing I like to say is, I kind of didn't really. I was trying to rush through my presentation, but the law that we follow is the law that kind of sets the stage. For again that the idea of what we see ourselves in relation to, and how we're supposed to compose ourselves, and how we voice those concerns, not only internally within my community, but more broadly in terms of where those decisions are made. And our law that we follow, as we call it, our Tamawit, our law, our unwritten law. And it's the law of this land. It's the natural law of this land. It's not something we, came up with. And unfortunately, as much as we hear about, federal laws, legislation, and things like that, we see how those laws change and how quickly they can change. We'll never change. We'll never deviate from the law, because the law that we follow is the land. It's natural law. It's not written law. It doesn't come and go with different administrations. And so, we're going to continue on that course regardless, and hold true to those things that we have always held on to guide the actions, and hopefully be that voice for the land and for what the new people call resources, and are providers of life to us. So I guess I'll hand it off to Tom, and he can talk more specifically about what those internal challenges are to our federal partners.
So I think this question, the way I'm going to answer it is it affects the entire agency, right? All levels of the agency are affected. But where the public is going to see the most impact is the lack of the lower grade levels of seasonals. Those are the folks that really make things happen in terms of trail maintenance, maintenance of campgrounds. All of those things happen with those lower level folks, those seasonal folks. But really, you need the upper level folks to do the NEPA. You know, there's an emphasis right now to harvest more timber off the landscape. And as mentioned, I think in the previous panel, somebody mentioned you need folks to do the NEPA. You need the wildlife biologists. You need the botanists. You need the archaeologists. Those folks are needed to implement those things. And without those folks, it's kind of hard to do the job that you need to do in terms of your obligation. And when I was talking with the local unit about this workshop, one comment that came across really clear to me is that whatever happens out there, it's going to take everyone, and that includes our partners, as well as the agencies, to make sure they live up to the obligation of why the NRA was created. That is really important to those folks that are still remaining with these agencies. They want to make sure they're doing a good job and living up to their obligation. The last thing I'll mention is just the dollar amount. So take a forest like the Wallowa Ribbon. You cut 10% of the Wallowa Ribbon, that's 3 dozen employees. Doesn't sound maybe like a lot. That's $4 million. It's not going into some community. The town that I live in, Baker City, with 10,000 people, you take $4 million out of that community, grocery stores start getting impacted. You know, gas stations, all those things that people use are affected when you have communities that are impacted. And I was at a Cliff Bentz, Representative Cliff Bentz from Oregon, at a town hall about a month ago. And I think he said there was like, I don't know if this is correct, but something like 9,000 federal employees in Oregon. Think about what that impact is if you take 10% or more of those employees out of the market. Some of those folks will find new jobs in the state. Other folks will go elsewhere. And so there is a monetary impact. But when it comes down to the land, it's the public that's, I think, going to see it.
Well, in all honesty, it's gonna be like, let's go in Hell's Canyon. Not having seasonal employees down there is gonna be extremely detrimental. Luckily, one of them, some letters got written, and one of them got to stay because he was on the chopping block. And but it's gonna be rough for the next couple of years without having the lower level seasonals. And getting to know that person for the last couple of years has been, it was heartbreaking seeing one of them on Channel 7 talking about it. I wish it didn't happen.
Going back to Jared, you know, Jared actually likes to have weekends. He actually takes days off. He has a family. So he's not there 24/7, and typically it was a seasonal that would like cover that. They'd work their schedules out. So there will be times people will go to launch boats and nobody's going to be there. And it's just, the door's open, but, you know, nobody's on.
There's been a lot of questions from the audience, but this one has to do in particular with the growing body of evidence around hydropower operations and greenhouse gases. So I'm wondering, Chris, if you could talk a little bit about how through the different operations in a hydro facility, some of the degassing as water is passed through the turbines, and how this might be addressed in the draft environmental impact statements and the FERC relicensing process.
Don't remember if greenhouse gases went in. Yeah, we did submit on that. I think the biggest thing, if you have heard about this issue, the big one that I'm aware of is the amount of greenhouse gases being produced by the reservoir itself. Basically, the oxidation of stuff going on in the reservoir, it's giving off CO2. In some cases, that might overwhelm the amount of CO2 you're saving by using hydropower as opposed to fossil fuels. If you read those articles, they're generally in the tropics. They're in Brazil or Africa. And there are areas that are very, very different. For the Pacific Northwest, that isn't really what we have. We don't have high organic content in the water coming in. We don't have the aerobic reactors of reservoirs in the same way. The analysis that was done by, not me, but like someone in Idaho Power knows a lot more about it, was essentially, yes, they do produce CO2, but it's nowhere near the greenhouse gas emissions in the other things you see in the heavens. I don't know, the degassing coming out the bottom of that, I don't.
Thanks, Chris. There's another question following up on Tom's discussion of invasive species, and an audience member would like to know what we can predict about quagga mussels in the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, and what measures could be taken to prevent or control their spread. So Tom or Chris, or anybody?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, but when it comes to the invasive species, right now they have it it just opened that section in Idaho Falls, just actually opened today. So it seems like they're on the right direction of getting it in the state, but that when it happened, it was a huge concern. And the best ways to mitigate it is clean, drain, and dry. There is actually a new law out that if you travel down the road with your plug in your jet boat or your regular boat, it's $1,000 fine and a misdemeanor. The problem is if they can trace it back to you that you have brought quagga mussels to that body of water, the civil suit is worse. So best thing to do is clean, drain, and dry. Make sure everything is clean. I think it's 140 degrees for 10 seconds with a pressure washer. I'm hoping, and I'm crossing my fingers, that it does not make it Hells Canyon, because that will be very detrimental. I've had very long conversations with the Department of Agriculture, Nick Zerflug specifically, about this issue.
I'll just add that I know the Forest Service has been trying to address it, not just on boats, but surprisingly enough, water drops from helicopters. They're making sure wherever they're drawing that water out of the lake, that they know whether or not it's free of invasive species. And then they're doing the treatment on the buckets themselves, spraying them off really, really well and drying them out, those kind of things. But you would never think with wildfire you'd have to deal with that, but you do.
I'm fresh out of quagga mussel materials.
Well, this one might be for you, Nakia. I suspect this is from one of my students in the back, but there is a question about the overall populations of salmon and steelhead that remain in serious trouble despite some important progress in the canyon. So the small increase that is scale in comparison, the question says, to the historic populations and the modern goals for salmon abundance. So what more can be done?
Yeah, well, somebody should have been listening to Joe's presentation. But just generally speaking, I think, and again, also, the concern isn't, we hear a lot about salmon, in particular spring Chinook salmon, of course, fall Chinook and steelhead, but we don't hear about many of the other anadromous as well as, resident species that are important, not only to our culture, the value system that we have, because again, you only protect what you value, and you kind of see I guess we kind of all laughed at for us is one of our sacred foods, and that's the hasu, lamprey eel. And, there's a reason why that it doesn't receive the same attention, because it is not a value to this society. It's a value to us. In fact, myself, I traveled down to Willamette Falls, 15-mile in Dallas to continue to harvest, because there's just not viable numbers that come into the system. And those provide a tremendous amount of nutrients, not only to the people, sturgeon fishermen that use them as bait, but also to the land and to the waters. And that's really a big part of the nutrients that's being missed. And those things, it's amazing to see how some of the places, we see with Klamath and Elwha, where some of those landscapes and those rivers have snapped back immediately. I've seen it in my life on our little creek right there, Lapwood Creek. I know the fisheries done a lot of, rehab work and work on that little creek. And when I was young, we caught like suckers, chisel-mouth, occasional steelhead would be up there. And but that water is, and Joe remembers, we used to swim in it. I'd get in trouble by my grandmother because the water was brown because of upstream, some of the livestock and stuff that were in the stream, some other issues. And there'd be big old things of foam floating down the river. I'm not a hydrologist, but I know that's not a good sign. And we used to play in it as kids. But the river, the creek has gotten much better. And since the introduction, again, going back to my childhood growing up, I never seen, we had a lot of bald eagles that would come in the fall time and stay till early spring, and then they would move out. We didn't have a lot of nesting bald eagles. Well, since the coho has come up in tremendous numbers, a big credit to our Nez Perce Tribe Fisheries Department, we have one nesting pair on Lamprey Creek, and two of them right there just below the mouth of Lamprey Creek under Clearwater. And I watch them every time I go by. And so you see how quickly the land can respond. And it's not just about a single species. These aren't single species issues. It's about how they're connected to this land and to the broader experience that we have that is innate to the way we understand things. And so these are important issues in terms of how we advocate for these sorts of things and how we continue to be the voice for those sorts of things, because it's like I mentioned before, it's bigger than preservation of a species of fish. Again, we're really talking about the preservation of life. And no matter how separated you are from that life, a lot of people go on the river and are connected in some way or another, but that life and that life that's provided for them is the same thing that provides for our life. And I just don't understand how people cannot conceptualize that. It's so very basic. People throughout the world understand that, but somehow when things are treated simply as a resource to be managed and to be to use to the greatest extent, then they lose that connection of what really is at the basis of all this, all of life, and it's our life too. And so that's very important and fundamental to keep in mind, and it's something that is always at the top of our mind when we are engaging on behalf of these important resources and life sources.
Last question for all the panelists, and we'll go ahead and start with Chris and work our way back this direction. But if there's a meeting like this in 50 years, celebrating the Hells Canyon National Recreation Area, what do you want them to talk about that we did now to make that a reality?
I'm just going to say Farm and Forest Service. Like the numbers were bad before, it's just gotten worse. Like it's not sustainable. Like it just, somebody has to be there. Somebody has to take care of it. And that somebody has to pay for that. I'm sorry. But that would be the biggest thing to make the HCNRA successful now and in the future. It's not really me because I don't work
it. Keep it the same. I mean, that's really the best way of saying it, is make sure they have their funding and find new ways of finding that funding. It's out. It's just go and find it and have the passion enough to go get it. I'm hoping I'm hearing this in 50 years.
Well, from my standpoint, I think in 50 years, I'd like to see the same energy that created the NRA in terms of caring for the land and serving the people. That's really what you want to see in 50 years, is that land is still cared for, still serving the public that uses that landscape. And that can only be done if the agencies are funded.
Yeah, and I guess, for me, knowing and hoping that many of these species of concern, spring Chinook salmon, again, many of the anadromous fish that we've spoken of, some of the terrestrial species, and all these things that we acknowledge in our creation, in our life as people, that if they're still here, then that's going to be a good sign, because that means we're still here.
Thank you so much for this panel, for putting up with the after lunch and the last panel.